Why did the only man who could have humiliated Bethany even more become the one who asked her to leave town with him? The church hall went still as Bethany gripped her trunk handle, Clyde's laughter cutting through the scrape of chairs. Harvey wouldn't meet her eyes. Then a giant cowboy filled the doorway, his hat brushing the frame. He looked from Bethany to the staring crowd and said something she never expected. "Stay with us and see where this road leads." By the time the westbound coach rolled into Bitter Pine, Bethany Whitaker had stopped trying to keep the dust off her dress. It was late September of 1887, and the afternoon sun had already slipped behind the first dark shoulders of the Sapphire Mountains. Pine smoke hung above the roofs. Horses stamped beside hitching rails, and wagon wheels had cut deep brown grooves through the main road, where an early rain had softened the earth 3 days before. Bethany stepped down carefully. She was 28, broad through the hips and shoulders, with a full figure no traveling dress could disguise. Her brown wool skirt was wrinkled from days of sitting. One cuff had picked up a black streak from the coach door. Her light brown hair had begun the journey pinned neatly beneath her hat, and ended it with several stubborn strands loose around her face. The driver dropped her trunk beside her. "Church is up that way." He pointed and climbed back onto the box. Bethany looked down the street. Bitter Pine was smaller than Harvey Benson had made it sound in his letters. There was a hotel with 2 stories and a porch, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a freight office, and a church whose white paint had surrendered years ago to Montana wind. Beyond the last roofs, open cattle country climbed toward pine-covered ridges already showing streaks of early snow. Bethany touched the letters inside her coat pocket. There were 11 of them. She knew because she had counted them too many times. Harvey had written about his horse business, about Bitter Pine, about wanting a sensible wife rather than a decorative one. One sentence had brought her all the way from Pennsylvania. "Character matters longer than beauty ever does." She had read those words until the fold through the middle of the page had nearly worn through. Bethany took hold of her trunk. The church was less than 200 yards away. She carried it herself. Voices reached her before she opened the door. Reverend Edwin Foster had arranged several introductions that autumn between unmarried women from eastern states and respectable men around Bitter Pine. Nothing was guaranteed. Everyone knew that. Letters were only letters, and an introduction was supposed to allow both people to decide freely. But months of correspondence had a way of making freedom feel a great deal like expectation. The church hall smelled of coffee, lamp oil, damp wool, and cinnamon cake. 3 women had arrived on Bethany's coach. 2 were already standing beside the men they had corresponded with. Reverend Foster spotted her. "Miss Whitaker." He was a thin man past 60 with silver hair and tired, kind eyes. "Welcome to Bitter Pine." "Thank you, Reverend." He reached for her trunk. Bethany shifted it away gently. "I have it." Then she saw Harvey. He stood beside the refreshment table wearing a charcoal coat, polished boots, and a watch chain stretched neatly across his vest. He was handsome. That surprised her. His photograph had not been flattering. For one brief second, something inside Bethany loosened. Harvey smiled when Reverend Foster called his name. Then he looked at her. The smile stopped. Not slowly. It simply disappeared. His eyes moved from Bethany's face to her shoulders, down the line of her dress, then quickly back to her face. Bethany had seen that look before. She had seen it at dances, at church socials, across counters when a shopkeeper realized the fashionable garment she was asking about was meant for herself. She had simply hoped not to see it here. "Harvey," Reverend Foster said, "this is Miss Bethany Whitaker." Harvey cleared his throat. "Miss Whitaker." "Mr. Benson." He shook her hand because everyone was watching. His fingers barely closed around hers. "You had a comfortable journey?" "No." The answer escaped before Bethany could soften it. A woman near the coffee urn gave a tiny laugh. Bethany added, "But I had a safe one." "Yes. Of course." Harvey looked toward Reverend Foster, then toward the door. Anywhere except at Bethany. She felt the letters in her pocket suddenly become very heavy. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Harvey said. Bethany glanced around the hall. People were pretending not to listen already. "Whatever you need to say can be said here." His jaw tightened. "Miss Whitaker, I fear there may have been a misunderstanding." "About what?" Harvey lowered his voice. "I formed a somewhat different impression from our correspondence." Bethany waited. He said nothing more, so she helped him. "You expected a smaller woman." A spoon struck a saucer somewhere behind them. Harvey's cheeks reddened. "I wouldn't phrase it quite that way." "How would you phrase it?" He glanced around again. "I believe a husband and wife ought to be suited to one another. We agreed on that." "Yes, but correspondence can only reveal so much." Bethany held his gaze. "You wrote that character mattered longer than beauty." "It does." "Then what did 11 letters fail to tell you about my character?" Harvey had no answer. That was answer enough. Bethany nodded once. "I see. Miss Whitaker, I don't wish to be cruel, no." Her voice remained even. "You simply wish not to marry me." Harvey swallowed. "Yes." The room had become painfully quiet. Then Clyde Abbott laughed. Bethany had noticed him earlier near the back wall, a thick-bodied freight contractor with a red neck and a coffee cup in one hand. "Harvey," Clyde said, "you ought to be grateful she came by coach. My freight wagon would have charged by the hundredweight." Two men snorted before remembering where they were. Reverend Foster turned sharply. "Mr. Abbott." "What?" "I'm only saying—" "Enough." Bethany looked at Clyde. He expected tears. That was plain on his face. Perhaps anger. Perhaps a scene he could repeat later at the saloon. She gave him neither. She bent, wrapped both hands around the iron handles of her trunk, and lifted. Harvey stepped forward. "Miss Whitaker, let me know." One word. Nothing loud about it. Bethany carried the trunk toward the door. Every step seemed louder than the last. Behind her, someone whispered. Someone else moved a chair. The other women avoided her eyes. Reverend Foster followed her onto the church steps. "Miss Whitaker." She kept walking. "Bethany." That stopped her. She set down the trunk. The wind coming from the mountains had sharpened while she was inside. Reverend Foster removed his hat. "I am deeply sorry. You didn't write his letters." "No." "You didn't make his decision." "No." "Then don't carry his shame for him." The old minister looked at her for a moment. "Where are you staying?" "The hotel. Do you have family I can telegraph?" Bethany gripped the trunk handle. "No." "Anyone in Pennsylvania?" "No one who is expecting me back." That was enough truth for one afternoon. She lifted the trunk again. Irene Walsh ran the Bitter Pine Hotel with the efficiency of a woman who had long ago decided that complaining merely delayed the next chore. She was 56, square-shouldered, gray-haired, and wore a ring of keys at her waist. She listened while Bethany explained. Then Irene named the price of a room. Bethany opened her purse. Coins clicked onto the desk. Irene counted them, then counted again. "That all?" Bethany didn't answer. Irene pushed the coins back. "I have a small room upstairs. You can settle later." "I don't take charity." "Didn't call it charity." You were about to. Irene's eyes narrowed. Bethany's did not. After a moment, Irene leaned both hands on the desk. What can you do? Cook, bake, sew, keep accounts, clean, preserve food. I've handled chickens and milk cows. I can carry more than most men expect me to. I noticed. Bethany almost smiled. Almost. Kitchen girl left last week, Irene said. Her mother took sick in Deer Lodge. I've been doing half her work myself. Pay? 75 cents a day. Meals included. Room? If you're working here. When do I start? Irene looked toward the clock behind the desk. Suppose I say tomorrow. Bethany took off her hat. I'd say you still have to wash tonight's supper pans yourself. Irene stared at her. Then one corner of her mouth moved. Kitchen's through there. By 7 that evening, Bethany's sleeves were rolled above her elbows and her hands were buried in hot dishwater. Downstairs, the dining room had emptied. The saloon next door had not. The wall between the buildings was thin enough that laughter occasionally traveled through it. So did names. Harvey Benson, the church, the Pennsylvania bride. Bethany scrubbed a roasting pan. A burst of laughter came through the wall. She scrubbed harder. Irene entered carrying an empty coffee pot. You don't have to listen to that. I'm not. They'll find something else to talk about. I'm sure they will. Irene set the pot beside the basin. Men like Clyde usually do. Bethany rinsed the pan and reached for another. For a few minutes, there was only water, iron, and the faint rattle of wind against the kitchen window. Then Irene pointed toward the storeroom. Flour sack needs bringing in before I lock up. Bethany wiped her hands. The sack weighed 50 pounds. She bent, caught it against her body, and lifted it onto her hip. At that exact moment, the back door opened. Cold air swept into the kitchen. Bethany turned. A man stood in the doorway. For an instant, she thought the lamplight was playing tricks. He was enormous. His shoulders nearly filled the frame, and the crown of his weathered hat came close to the top of the door. His coat carried dried mud along the hem. A leather glove was tucked through his belt, and behind him, Bethany could see the dark shape of a wagon and 2 children waiting beneath a lap robe. The stranger looked at Irene, then at Bethany, not down her body, at her face. His voice was low enough to quiet the room without effort. Is that the woman Benson left at the church? Bethany still had the flour sack balanced against her hip. Irene Walsh gave the stranger a look that could have cracked stove iron. Her name is Bethany Whitaker. The man removed his hat. That changed him somehow. Without it, he looked even larger. Dark hair touched with early gray lay flattened across his forehead, and there was a pale scar near his left temple that disappeared into the hairline. He was not handsome in any polished way. His nose had been broken once, maybe twice. Wind and sun had put permanent lines around his eyes. He looked at Bethany again. Miss Whitaker? Mr. Patrick Morgan. He nodded toward the sack. You want a hand with that? No. All right. No argument. No half-smile suggesting he found her stubbornness amusing. Bethany carried the sack into the storeroom herself. When she returned, Patrick was speaking quietly with Irene about flour, lamp oil, and the price of salt by the 50-pound sack. Nothing in his manner suggested he had come to stare at the woman everyone in Bitter Pine was talking about. Bethany found that more unsettling than staring would have been. A girl's face appeared around the open back door. She was small, perhaps 8, bundled in a green wool coat with one mitten missing. Papa? Patrick turned immediately. Stay by the wagon, Molly. I'm cold. I know. I'll be there in a minute. Behind her stood a lanky boy several years older, arms crossed, trying to look as though the cold did not bother him. Patrick gathered his purchases. Irene handed him a folded receipt. $23.16. I'll put the kerosene on next month's account if you prefer. Patrick shook his head. Pay it now. He counted bills and coins onto the counter. Then he looked once toward Bethany. Good evening, Miss Whitaker. Good evening. He put his hat back on and ducked slightly beneath the doorframe as he left. Bethany watched the door swing shut. Irene picked up the coins. That's Patrick Morgan. You said that. Owns Morgan Ridge. Bethany reached for another pan. Should that mean something to me? 8 miles northwest. Cattle, some horses. Good creek ground if winter doesn't get too mean. Irene paused. Widower. Bethany scrubbed the pan. I didn't ask. No, Irene turned away. That's why I'm telling you. The next morning began before sunrise. Bethany came downstairs at 5:30 and found the kitchen already warm. Irene was slicing bacon at the work table while coffee simmered in a blackened pot. By 7, ranchers and freight men were filling the dining room. Bethany carried plates from the kitchen, keeping her eyes on the work. Harvey Benson sat near the front window with 2 horse buyers. He noticed her, then looked away. Clyde Abbott did not. Morning, Pennsylvania, he called. Bethany set a plate of eggs before a customer. Morning, Mr. Abbott. His grin widened. At another table sat Patrick Morgan with the 2 children from the night before. Trevor, Bethany guessed, was the older boy. He ate quickly, head down, already wearing work gloves tucked into his belt. Molly pushed pieces of biscuit around her plate. Patrick noticed. You feeling all right? She nodded, then shook her head. Bethany was carrying 2 loaded trays when she passed Clyde's table. His boot moved. So did his chair. Only a few inches. Enough. Bethany saw it too late. Her skirt caught the chair leg. One tray dipped hard. Coffee slid across a saucer. A plate shifted toward the edge. Before anything fell, the chair moved backward. Patrick had risen. One hand closed around the chair back and pulled it away as easily as though it weighed nothing. Clyde's smile vanished. Patrick did not say a word. He simply looked at him. The room settled. Bethany straightened the tray. I could have handled it. Patrick's eyes moved to hers. I know. That was all. He sat back down. Bethany carried the trays to the kitchen. Her hands did not shake until she set them on the counter. Irene saw. She said nothing. Half an hour later, Molly was sick beside the hotel porch. Patrick knelt beside her so quickly his knee struck the wooden step. Trevor hovered behind him. She was fine this morning, he said. You don't know that, Patrick answered. She said she was. Children say they're fine when they want adults to stop asking. Molly wiped her mouth with the back of her glove. Bethany came out carrying a damp cloth. Patrick looked up. Irene said she felt poorly last night. A little, Bethany said. She might have eaten something that didn't agree with her. Or the wagon ride. Molly leaned weakly against her father's shoulder. Bethany crouched. Can I feel your forehead? The girl looked at Patrick first. He nodded. Bethany touched the back of her fingers to Molly's skin. Warm, but not much. Trevor stepped closer. Is she sick? Maybe tired. People don't throw up because they're tired. Sometimes they do. How do you know? Bethany looked at him. I've been sick before. Trevor's mouth tightened, but he stopped questioning. They took Molly upstairs to a small room off the hall. Bethany mixed weak tea and opened the window an inch to clear the close air. Trevor paced. Bethany watched him do it twice. Then she handed him the water pitcher. "Can you fill this?" He stared at her. "Why?" "Because your sister needs water, and because walking a useful errand is better than wearing a trench in Mrs. Walsh's floorboards." Patrick almost smiled. Trevor did not, but he took the pitcher. Molly slept for nearly 2 hours. When she woke, the color had returned to her face. Patrick let out a breath Bethany had not realized he had been holding. "Thank you. I didn't do much. You stayed." Bethany looked at Molly. Someone needed to. Patrick's gaze remained on her a moment longer. By afternoon, Molly was eating toast. Patrick and Trevor finished loading supplies into the wagon behind the hotel. Bethany was in the kitchen cutting potatoes when Irene came in. "Your work here ends Friday." Bethany stopped the knife. "I thought you said you needed help." "I do. Through Friday." "Why Friday?" "My niece is coming back from Deer Lodge. Her mother improved." Bethany stared at the potato under her hand. "I see. I can still give you the room 2 more nights." Bethany nodded. "Thank you." Irene watched her. "You have enough for the eastbound coach?" Bethany went back to cutting. "No." "How short?" "Short enough." "Bethany." She set the knife down. "I'll figure something out." A knock sounded against the kitchen frame. Patrick stood there. He had heard enough. Bethany could tell by his face. She hated that. "Irene," he said. "Can I speak to Miss Whitaker?" Irene wiped her hands on her apron. "You already are." Patrick waited. Irene sighed and left. Bethany folded her arms. "If you're about to offer money, don't." "I'm not." "Good. I've got work." She said nothing. "Through winter." Bethany's arms remained folded. "What kind?" "Everything." That almost made her laugh. Patrick leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Cooking. Laundry. Keeping stores. Some help with Molly. Trevor manages himself mostly, whether he should or not." "I heard that," Trevor said from somewhere outside. Patrick ignored him. "There's ranch work if you're willing. Not required. Pay? $14 a month. Room and board." Bethany blinked. It was respectable money. "Private room?" "Yes." "Door?" "Closes." "Locks?" Patrick paused. "Yes." That pause told her he understood why she had asked. She looked down at her hands. "You don't know me?" "No." "Yesterday I was a stranger everyone was laughing at." "You're still a stranger." Her head came up. Patrick's expression had not changed. "Then why offer?" He thought before answering. "Because I need help before snow shuts the upper road. Because Irene says you work without stealing, complaining, or waiting to be told twice." "I've worked one night." She forms opinions fast. Bethany glanced toward the doorway. "And because of Molly?" "Partly." "That's not enough." "No." Patrick rubbed his thumb along the worn brim of his hat. "I also watched you walk out of that church yesterday carrying your own trunk while men twice as comfortable as you pretended not to see." Bethany went still. He continued. "I'm not looking for a wife." The words should not have mattered. They did. She hated that they did. Patrick seemed to notice something in her face and corrected himself. "I'm saying this is work. Nothing hidden in it. Until spring. Until the roads open properly. If you want to leave sooner, you leave sooner. And if I want to stay in Bitter Pine after? That's your concern, not mine." Bethany studied him. No promises, no pretty language, no character matters longer than beauty ever does. Just terms, wages, a room, a lock, freedom to go. From upstairs came slow footsteps. Molly appeared at the end of the hall wrapped in a blanket. Patrick straightened. You should be lying down. I'm tired of lying down. You've been lying down 2 hours. That's a long time. She came into the kitchen and stopped beside Bethany. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Molly slipped her small hand into Bethany's. Bethany looked down. The girl looked exhausted, embarrassed, and entirely certain of what she had done. Patrick watched them. Something in his face shifted, only slightly. He looked at Bethany again. Come home with us. Bethany did not answer immediately. Molly's hand was still inside hers, small and warm. Behind Patrick, Trevor stood near the back door with his coat already buttoned, watching Bethany as though the wrong answer might confirm something he had already decided. Patrick did not fill the silence. That helped. Bethany looked at Molly, then at Irene, who had returned to the doorway but wisely kept her mouth shut. Finally, Bethany said, I have one trunk. Patrick nodded. Good. That's all you're going to say? Would 2 trunks change the offer? No. Then I suppose we're settled. For the first time that day, Bethany almost smiled. They left Bitter Pine just after 3. Patrick loaded her trunk beside sacks of flour, salt, lamp oil, and a wooden crate of canned goods. Molly sat between Patrick and Bethany on the wagon seat, wrapped in the green coat and a lap blanket Irene had insisted she take. Trevor rode behind them on a bay gelding. The road north climbed slowly out of town, following Pine Water Creek for the first 2 miles before turning toward the foothills. Bitter Pine disappeared behind them, one roof at a time. The country opened. Yellow grass rolled toward darker stands of pine. Cottonwoods crowded the creek bottom, their leaves already turning pale gold. Far above, the Sapphire Mountains held a thin line of snow along the highest ridges. Patrick drove with both hands loose on the reins. Road gets rough after the bridge. Bethany looked ahead. I've survived Pennsylvania roads. These aren't Pennsylvania roads. Then I'll survive Montana ones. A faint sound came from Patrick. Not quite laughter. Molly noticed. She looked up at him. Papa, did you laugh? No. You did. I breathed. Funny breath. Patrick stared straight ahead. Bethany turned toward the mountains so he would not see her smile. The road did get rough. Past the bridge, wagon ruts deepened where spring runoff had eaten the earth. Patrick slowed the team and guided the wheels around exposed stones. Bethany watched his hands. Large enough to cover nearly half the reins in one grip, but gentle with the horses. When the wagon tilted sharply over one rut, his arm came across the back of the seat without touching her, a quiet barrier in case she slipped. He removed it the moment the wagon leveled. Nothing said. She noticed anyway. Morgan Ridge came into view shortly before sunset. The ranch sat above a broad creek meadow with pine timber climbing behind it. The house was larger than Bethany expected, 2 stories of weathered timber and pale board siding, with a porch running across the front and a stone chimney at the western end. Beyond it stood a barn, horse stable, hay shed, bunkhouse, and several fenced corrals. Cattle moved dark against the far meadow. A ranch gate hung slightly crooked between 2 heavy posts. Patrick stopped the wagon. Trevor rode ahead, dismounted, and pulled it open. Bethany looked toward the north. How much land? 640 acres deeded. Patrick nodded toward the higher ground. We graze beyond that by agreement in summer. Bethany whistled softly. Patrick glanced at her. Looks bigger than it is when you're trying to pay for it. She remembered the line, not because she understood it yet, because of the way he said it. The wagon rolled into the yard. A black and white dog came barking from beneath the porch, stopped when he saw Bethany, and began circling the wagon instead. "That's Moss," Molly said. "Does Moss bite?" "Only people Trevor tells him to." Trevor shot his sister a look. "That's not true." "It could be." Patrick climbed down first. When Bethany moved to follow, he offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm swallowed hers. He did not pull. He simply steadied her until both boots were on the ground. The front door opened into a large main room that was warmer than the yard and smelled of wood smoke, wool, coffee, and something faintly sweet Bethany could not identify. There were signs of children everywhere. A slate beside the stove, 2 carved animals on the mantel, a man's work coat hanging from a peg near the door. And then there were the other things. A faded blue shawl hung behind the pantry door. A small sewing basket with a wooden lid sat on a shelf above the kitchen table. The hooks by the back door were mounted low, lower than Bethany would have chosen. On a chair beside the fireplace rested an unfinished patchwork quilt, folded carefully so the needlework would not catch. Bethany did not ask. She did not need to. Janet Morgan was still in the house, not as a ghost, as habit. Molly dropped her blanket and rushed toward the kitchen. "Miss Emma used to put the cups there." Patrick's expression changed. "Her name was Mrs. Clark." "I know." Molly pointed. "She put them there. Mama put them here." Bethany looked at the shelf. "Where did your mother keep them?" Molly pointed to a lower cupboard. Bethany nodded. "Then that's where they stay." Trevor, standing near the doorway, looked at her. Patrick carried Bethany's trunk upstairs. Her room was at the back of the house overlooking the creek meadow. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest with one missing handle, and a small iron latch on the inside of the door. Patrick pointed to it. "Lock sticks sometimes. Lift the door a little when you slide it." Bethany tried. The bolt moved. "Works. I'll plane the edge tomorrow." "You don't need to. It's my door." "Technically, it's my door while I'm living here." Patrick looked at her. "Then I'll fix your door tomorrow." He left before she could argue. By supper, Bethany had learned where the flour was kept, which kettle leaked at the handle, and that Trevor preferred his potatoes with more salt than Patrick allowed. Nobody asked her to cook. She did anyway. Not because she meant to prove anything. Because Patrick had spent the last hour unloading supplies, Trevor was bedding the horses, and Molly had fallen asleep in a chair near the stove. Bethany made fried potatoes, salt pork, and biscuits. The biscuits rose unevenly because she did not yet know the stove. They tasted fine. Trevor ate 3. He said nothing. On the second morning, Bethany found the cedar chest upstairs while looking for extra blankets. She opened it halfway. Inside lay linens, 2 winter quilts, several children's garments, and a bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon. She closed it. That afternoon, Molly asked for drawing paper. Bethany helped her find some in a drawer near the writing desk. A dried wildflower slipped out from between 2 pages of an old Bible. Molly froze. Bethany bent but did not touch it. "My mama put that there." "I thought she might have." "It's from the creek meadow." Molly picked it up carefully. "She said flowers keep better in books." "Some do. Can I put it back?" "It's yours." Molly looked at Bethany. "You're not going to move things?" "Not unless they need moving." Mrs. Clark moved Mama's blue bowl. Maybe she didn't know. Trevor yelled. "That sounds like Trevor." Molly giggled. From the hallway came a floorboard creak. Trevor stood there. He had heard enough. Over the next 3 days, Bethany worked carefully. She scrubbed soot from the stove, mended a split flour sack, washed kitchen curtains but put them back on the same rods, repaired a torn chair cushion with cloth she found in the sewing basket, then returned every spool of thread to the exact place she had found it. Patrick noticed. He noticed without saying he noticed. That was becoming familiar. On the fourth afternoon, Bethany found Trevor in the kitchen holding Janet's sewing box. His jaw was tight. "You used this?" "Yes." "Why? Because it had thread." "That was my mother's." "I know." "Then why'd you touch it?" Bethany dried her hands on a towel. "Because the cushion needed mending." "You could have used something else." "I could have." "Are you going to start throwing her things away now?" The question came too fast, too sharp. Molly, at the table with a piece of charcoal, stopped drawing. Bethany looked at Trevor. Then she crossed the room, took the sewing box gently from his hands, placed it back on the shelf. Exactly where it had been. "Nothing belonging to your mother moves unless you or your father decide it moves." Trevor stared at her. Bethany continued. "I'm here to help keep the house standing. I'm not here to pretend nobody lived in it before me." Silence. Patrick stood in the hallway. Bethany had not heard him come in. Neither had Trevor. Patrick looked at the sewing box, then at his son. "Get the wood in before dark." Trevor's mouth tightened, but he picked up his coat and left. Molly began drawing again. Patrick did not say anything to Bethany. He washed his hands, sat at the table. Normally he finished supper and returned outside before the lamps needed trimming. That evening he stayed. He drank 1 cup of coffee, then another. Bethany worked at the stove while Molly showed him a drawing of moss chasing what she claimed was a wolf and Trevor claimed was clearly a rabbit. Patrick listened. Once Bethany looked over and found him already looking at her. He turned toward his coffee. She went back to drying plates. Later, after Molly had gone upstairs, Bethany stepped outside to shake crumbs from a cloth. The evening was cold and clear. Trevor stood near the barn door. Molly was beside him, laughing at something Bethany had said through the kitchen window a moment earlier. Trevor watched his sister. The laughter faded from his face. When Molly ran back toward the house, Trevor stayed. Bethany started toward the porch. "Miss Whittaker." She stopped. Trevor looked at the ground, then up at her. "Don't make my sister think you're staying." Bethany held Trevor's gaze. The wind moved through the yard, cold enough now that it carried the first true edge of winter. Somewhere behind the barn, a loose piece of tin clicked against wood. "I haven't told her I'm staying." "You don't have to." Trevor shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "You sit with her. You cook with her. You let her follow you around like—" He stopped. "Like what?" "Like you're going to be here." Bethany looked toward the house. Warm light showed through the kitchen window. Molly had already gone back inside. "Your father hired me through winter, I know. When spring comes, I don't know what happens." Trevor's mouth tightened. "Then tell her that." "I will if she asks." "She won't." "Why not?" "Because she doesn't ask things when she's afraid of the answer." That sounded older than 13. Bethany folded the cloth she'd been holding and tucked it under one arm. "What happened to the women before me?" Trevor looked toward the darkening pasture. "Mrs. Clark stayed 3 months. The woman Molly mentioned?" He nodded. "Before her there was Mrs. Hewitt. She cooked. Left when her brother found work near Helena. And the third?" "Miss Palmer." His jaw shifted. "She said she liked us." Bethany waited. "Then she married a man in Deer Lodge and moved away." Trevor kicked at a stone. Molly cried for a week. Bethany said nothing. People leave, he said. They always have a reason. Most people do, so don't act like you don't. Bethany took a breath. I won't lie to Molly. Trevor looked back at her. Your father hired me through winter. I won't tell either of you I'm staying after that when I don't know if I am. For a moment he looked angry, then almost disappointed, as if some part of him had wanted her to promise and another part had been waiting to prove the promise false. Good, he said. He walked away. Bethany watched him disappear into the barn. The next morning, Patrick found her trying to drag a torn hay cover across the side yard. The canvas had been folded against the shed wall, heavy with damp from the previous night's frost. One corner had split near a brass eyelet. Patrick stopped beside the wagon. What are you doing? Moving this. I can see that. Then we're both informed. He looked at the canvas. That weighs nearly as much as Molly. Then Molly should eat more. A pause. Patrick reached down and caught the far end. Bethany stopped. I didn't ask for help. No. You're doing it anyway. Yes. She stared at him. Patrick stared back. Then Bethany said, Fine. They carried it together. That was how the ranch lessons started. Not with an agreement. With work that needed doing. Patrick showed her how the hay cover was secured so mountain wind could not get beneath it. He showed her the difference between a knot meant to hold under steady pull and one that needed to come free quickly with cold fingers. Bethany got the first one wrong. Patrick untied it. She tried again. Wrong. He untied it again. You can say something, she said. What? That I'm terrible at it. You're new at it. That's a kinder version. It's also true. On the fourth attempt, the knot held. Patrick pulled hard. The rope stayed firm. There. Bethany rubbed her palms. I suppose you'll tell me not to celebrate. I wasn't planning to. 2 days later, she found him in the horse stable examining a sorrel mare. The animal kept shifting her weight. Patrick ran one hand slowly down the mare's foreleg. Bethany stood at the stall opening. What's wrong with her? Don't know yet. That seems encouraging. Patrick glanced over. Come here. Bethany stepped inside. The mare flicked one ear toward her. Patrick placed Bethany's hand against the horse's shoulder. Feel that? Warm. Now the other side. She moved around. Less warm. She's favoring the first leg. Bethany crouched carefully. Patrick stopped her with one hand raised. Don't get under her until you know what she's likely to do. Bethany straightened. I thought horses could sense good intentions. Patrick's mouth moved. Who told you that? Women who didn't own horses. That time he did laugh. Only once. A low sound. Bethany looked at him. Patrick immediately turned back to the mare. Stone bruise, he said after checking the hoof. Nothing serious. You laugh. Apparently. I was beginning to think Molly invented it. Patrick gave her a flat look. Bethany smiled. By the middle of October, the mornings came white with frost. Bethany learned the back gate needed lifting before the latch would catch. She learned where Moss liked to sleep when the wind came from the west. She learned which coffee mug Patrick always reached for, the thick brown one with a chipped rim, though there were 3 better cups on the shelf. She also learned that ranch work punished carelessness immediately. A rope burned across her palm one afternoon when she let it slide too quickly. She hissed and dropped it. Patrick was beside her before she straightened. Let me see. It's nothing. Bethany. It was the first time he had used her first name without thinking. She noticed. So did he. Neither mentioned it. She held out her hand. The skin was red but unbroken. Patrick turned her palm toward the light. His hand was enormous beneath hers. "You're gripping too tight." "I thought tighter was safer." "Sometimes tighter just gives the rope more skin to take." He released her. "Use the gloves next time." "I don't have work gloves." He looked at her. She shrugged. "I had gloves in Pennsylvania. They weren't meant for cattle." Patrick nodded once. That evening nothing more was said. At supper, Molly complained about onions. Trevor told her onions were the least offensive thing in the stew. Molly accused him of not knowing what offensive meant. Patrick ate quietly. Bethany reached automatically for the chair at the corner of the table. It was heavier than the others, built with thick oak legs and cross braces beneath the seat. She had chosen it every night since arriving, not because it was comfortable, because she trusted it. She sat. The chair held. It always did. The habit was older than bitter pine, older than Pennsylvania boarding houses, older than Harvey Benson. Bethany had spent years entering rooms and judging chairs before she judged people. Thin spindles, loose joints, narrow seats. She knew the little pause before lowering herself. The slight shift of weight. The private calculation no one ever mentioned, because mentioning it would be worse. She had stopped thinking about it consciously. Patrick had not. 2 mornings later, Bethany came into the kitchen and stopped. One of the ordinary chairs was upside down on the table. Patrick was kneeling beside it with a brace of fresh-cut wood, a hand auger, and a small box of square nails. What happened? Nothing. Bethany looked at the chair. Then why is it upside down? Needed strengthening. Did it? Does now. He set another brace beneath the seat and drove the nail. Bethany watched. The wood was new. The joints had been tight yesterday. Her eyes moved to the heavy corner chair, then back to Patrick. He kept working. She understood. A strange heat climbed into her face. Not embarrassment exactly. Something quieter. More dangerous. You didn't have to do that. Patrick did not look up, had wood. That isn't what I said. I know. He tested the brace with both hands. Solid. Then he turned the chair upright. Bethany touched the top rail. You noticed? Patrick wiped sawdust from his palm onto his trousers. I noticed things. She looked at him. For once, he did not look away first. The silence changed. Then Molly came running downstairs, holding one boot. Moss stole my sock. Patrick closed his eyes. Bethany started laughing. The moment broke. By late afternoon, snow clouds had gathered over the Sapphire Mountains. Not a storm yet, just a gray wall high above the timber. Bethany was folding laundry in her room when she noticed something on the bed. A coat. Heavy dark wool. Long enough to reach below her knees. It was not new, but it had been carefully brushed and relined. The sleeves had been let out. The side seams had been altered. Bethany set down the shirt in her hands. She lifted the coat, turned it, checked the stitching. Someone had adjusted it to fit her. Not approximately. Precisely. There was no note, no explanation. Only the coat laid neatly across the bed, waiting for weather that had not arrived yet. Bethany stood there a long moment with her fingers pressed against the altered seam. Then she looked toward the hallway. Patrick's boots were moving below. Slow. Heavy. Heading toward the back door. Bethany picked up the coat and went after him. Patrick had one hand on the latch when she reached the kitchen. Patrick, He stopped. That alone told her enough. Bethany held up the coat. "What is this?" He looked at it. "A coat." I gathered that. Patrick's hand remained on the latch. "The one you had wasn't warm enough." Bethany walked closer. "You bought this?" "I paid for it." "From who?" Irene knew a woman in town who could alter one. Bethany looked down at the seams. The work was careful. The waist had been let out. The sleeves had been lengthened. Extra wool had been added beneath the arms so the coat would move properly when she lifted them. She looked back at him. How did she know the measurements? Patrick hesitated. That was rare. Bethany narrowed her eyes. "You gave her my old coat?" "No." "Then how?" "I told Irene what needed changing." Bethany stared at him. "You described my measurements?" His ears went red. "Only slightly." "Enough. I described the coat." "You described me." "I did not." "Patrick." He looked toward the window. "You would have refused if I'd asked." Bethany folded the coat over one arm. "I might have." "You would have." "That's not the point." "What is?" "The point is you can't simply decide what I need." Patrick finally turned fully toward her. "No." His voice stayed calm. "But I can decide I don't want someone working on my ranch in a Pennsylvania coat when November gets here." Bethany opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed. It came out before she could stop it. Patrick looked at her as if the sound had surprised him. It surprised her, too. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the corner of his mouth shifted. Not much, but enough that Bethany saw it. "There," she said. Patrick frowned. "There what?" "You nearly smiled." "I did no such thing." "You absolutely did." He opened the door. "Try the coat." "You're changing the subject." "Try the coat." Bethany slipped it on. The wool settled heavily around her shoulders. Warm. Properly fitted. She lifted both arms. No pulling. No tightness. Patrick watched the movement. Not her body. Good? Bethany lowered her arms. "Yes." He nodded once, then stepped outside. The cold air rushed in behind him. Bethany stood in the kitchen wearing the coat long after the door shut. Molly found her there. "You look nice." Bethany glanced down. "Your father bought it." Molly smiled. "He buys terrible things. That's encouraging. He bought Trevor a hat once that made him look like a mushroom." From the back porch, Trevor shouted, "I heard that." Molly grinned. The warmth lasted 3 days. Then Harvey Benson came to Morgan Ridge. He arrived just before noon with Clyde Abbott and a third man Bethany had not met. The stranger was lean and neatly dressed for a cattle buyer, with a black felt hat, clean gloves, and a narrow leather case strapped behind his saddle. Patrick was near the corral examining a gray gelding when the riders came through the gate. Bethany saw them from the kitchen window. Harvey saw her almost immediately. His posture changed. Not much, but enough. Bethany dried her hands and stepped onto the porch. Patrick looked toward her, then toward Harvey. "Bethany," he said, "this is Leonard Shaw. Buys cattle through Helena and Butte." Shaw tipped his hat. "Ma'am." "Clyde, you know." "I do." Clyde gave her a grin that was smaller than the one he'd worn in Bitter Pine. Harvey cleared his throat. "Miss Whitaker. Mr. Benson." Patrick said nothing. Shaw was there to inspect 3 horses Patrick hoped to sell before winter. They moved toward the stable. Bethany went back inside. She told herself she had no reason to think about Harvey. Then she heard his voice outside the open kitchen window. "I admit, Morgan, I was surprised. Patrick answered. By what? Seeing her here. A pause. Harvey lowered his voice, but not enough. I suppose things worked out for the best. Bethany stopped slicing carrots. Clyde said something she couldn't make out. Harvey continued. Miss Whitaker seems to have found useful employment. The knife in Bethany's hand went still. She set it down. Then she walked outside. All four men looked toward her. Patrick's eyes changed first. Not alarm. Attention. Bethany stopped beside the fence. Useful employment? Harvey's face tightened. I meant no offense. That seems to happen often with you. Clyde looked down at his boots. Shaw remained quiet. Harvey adjusted one glove. I only meant that circumstances appear to have settled favorably. For whom? Miss Whitaker, Bethany. The correction came from Patrick. Harvey looked at him, then back at her. Bethany. He said it as though the name itself were awkward. I've regretted how things happened at the church. Bethany held his gaze. Have you? Yes. Because you rejected me? No. I had the right to decide whether we suited. You did. Harvey looked relieved. Then Bethany continued. You never owed me affection. The relief vanished. You never owed me marriage. She took one step closer. But you owed me honesty before I crossed 1,000 miles believing you. The yard went quiet. A horse shifted inside the corral. Leather creaked. Harvey's mouth opened. Bethany did not let him rescue himself. You wrote 11 letters. 11. You told me character mattered more than beauty. You asked about my work, my church, my habits. You asked whether I could keep accounts and whether I liked children. Her voice never rose. Not once did you ask the thing that mattered enough to make you walk away. Harvey looked toward Patrick. Patrick did not move. He did not answer for her. He simply stood beside the fence, one massive hand resting on the top rail. Present. Nothing more. Bethany looked back at Harvey. You were allowed to say no. She paused. You were not entitled to make me pay for your cowardice. Clyde shifted uncomfortably. Leonard Shaw's eyes moved from Bethany to Patrick. Harvey finally said, I'm sorry. Bethany nodded. All right. He blinked. That's all? What did you expect? I don't know, then we're even. She turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, Patrick said to Shaw, The gelding's this way. His voice was calm, cold enough to freeze water. The men finished their business. Shaw bought one horse and made an offer on another. Patrick refused. Harvey spoke little. Clyde spoke less. They left before 2. Bethany spent the rest of the afternoon in the root cellar sorting potatoes. She preferred work after anger. Work gave the hands somewhere to put it. Near dusk, Patrick found her carrying a basket toward the kitchen. He took the other handle without asking. Bethany let him. They carried it together. At the porch, she said, You didn't say anything. Patrick set the basket down. You didn't need me to, I noticed. He looked at her. I noticed that too. Bethany's hand tightened around the basket handle. Patrick looked toward the yard, then back at her. You did well. She gave him a flat look. I wasn't performing. I know. That made the words land differently. Patrick opened the door for her. That night, after Molly and Trevor had gone upstairs, Bethany found him sitting at the kitchen table. A ledger lay in front of him. Thick, worn. The leather cover had gone soft at the corners. Beside it, sat a stack of folded receipts, several feed invoices, and a stub of pencil, worn nearly to nothing. Patrick pushed the ledger across the table. Bethany stopped. "What is this? My ranch accounts. I can see that." "I can't." She looked up. Patrick rubbed a thumb along the edge of one receipt. "I can count cattle. I can tell you which horse will throw a shoe before the week is out. I can look at a fence and know how long it'll stand." He nodded toward the book. "This gets away from me." Bethany sat down. She opened the ledger. Columns leaned across the page in Patrick's heavy handwriting. Dates, feed purchases, hay, salt, veterinary supplies, interest charges, cattle sales. Some entries were clean. Others were squeezed into margins. She turned a page, then another. Patrick watched her face. Bethany reached for the pencil. "You're better with figures than I am," he said. She looked up. He held her eyes. "Tell me what I'm missing." Bethany lowered her gaze to the ledger. The first few pages were ordinary enough. Flour, salt, nails, lamp oil, harness repairs, a veterinary visit in March, 2 broken wagon springs, hay bought at a high winter price the previous January. Then the numbers changed. Not sharply. Quietly. That was worse. She turned back 3 pages and ran her finger down the column. "Who is Leonard Shaw to you?" Patrick leaned back in the chair. "Buyer. Sometimes lender. Sometimes." He covered feed after Janet died. Bethany looked up. Patrick's face did not change, but his right hand closed once around the chipped brown coffee mug. "How much?" "At first?" "All of it." He exhaled through his nose. $240. Bethany looked back at the ledger. That wasn't all. No. She waited. Patrick got up, crossed to the small writing desk near the wall, and opened the lower drawer. He came back with a folded document. The paper had been handled enough that the creases were beginning to split. Bethany opened it carefully. Leonard Shaw's name was written at the bottom, Patrick's above it. There was also a witness line, a date from 3 years earlier. Bethany read in silence. Molly's footsteps crossed the floor upstairs, then stopped. A door closed. Patrick watched Bethany's face. "Well, you borrowed against the ranch." "Part of it. The North Meadow. Only if I fail to pay." Bethany looked at him. "When? Spring?" "What date?" "First cattle settlement after thaw." She found the clause. There it was. The North Meadow. She had walked it twice with Trevor. Low country beside the creek, protected from the hardest wind, grass holding green longer than the upper pasture. Bethany folded the note once. "How important is it?" Patrick did not answer quickly. "That meadow, yes." He rubbed a thumb against the table edge. "Best calving ground we've got." "And water?" "Pine water runs close enough to hold through dry months. If you lost it?" Patrick looked toward the dark window. "I'd still own a ranch." His voice went flat. "Wouldn't mean I could run it worth a damn." Bethany sat back. That explained more than she liked. The careful purchases, the refusal to put lamp oil on account, the worn harness patched instead of replaced, the roof repair Patrick had done himself despite the weather. She turned another page. "You've been paying interest." "Yes." "Quarterly?" "Mostly." "Mostly isn't a number." Patrick looked at her. She held out her hand. "Receipts." He gave her the stack. Bethany sorted them by date. Patrick's papers were not neat, but they existed. That mattered. She found one from Shaw, then another, then one from a feed merchant in Bitter Pine, then a cattle sale receipt from the previous spring. She began making a separate list on a clean sheet. Patrick sat across from her. For 10 minutes, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You always do this?" "Do what?" "Look at paper like you're angry with it." Bethany did not look up. Paper is usually honest if the person writing on it is. And if they aren't, then the paper gets interesting. Patrick almost smiled. She circled a figure. "You sold 42 head last spring. 43. Receipt says 42. Patrick leaned over. His shoulder came close to hers. Bethany could smell leather, cold air, and wood smoke. He pointed. One calf went back lame before weighing. She nodded. Then 42. She wrote it down. Patrick remained beside her a moment longer than necessary, then moved back. By the end of the hour, Bethany had 3 columns. What the ranch earned, what it spent, what it owed. She tapped the last one. "This is the problem. I know I owe him. You know the amount you borrowed." Patrick's brow tightened. "You're not counting interest. I am." She pushed the page toward him. "You're also paying like a man who hasn't looked at the total in a year." He read. His jaw hardened. "That's too high." "Yes." "You sure?" Bethany looked at him. "Would you like me to be less sure?" "No." "Good." He read the figures again. Outside, the wind pressed against the north wall. The stove gave a low iron tick. Patrick said, "Can we make spring?" Bethany hesitated. "Maybe." He looked up sharply. She continued before he could speak. "If winter is kind, if feed doesn't spike, if you don't lose cattle, if nothing breaks that costs real money." That's a lot of ifs. "It is." Patrick leaned back. For the first time since Bethany had known him, he looked tired in a way work did not explain. Not sleepy, cornered. Bethany gathered the receipts. "How many steers are you feeding that won't earn their keep by spring?" Patrick's eyes narrowed. 2. "Which ones?" "Red ear tag and the brindled one by the south lot." "Sell them." "Now?" "Before you feed them another 3 months. Prices are low. Feed isn't free." Patrick rubbed his beard. Bethany continued. "Your salt purchases are too frequent. We use what we use. Then someone is buying too much at once or storing it badly." He frowned. She reached for another receipt. "And you're paying full freight from Bitter Pine every time you send for small quantities." Patrick looked toward the pantry. "How much difference?" "Enough that I noticed." He sat very still. Bethany waited. Finally, he said, "I can talk to Irene's supplier." "Good. I could sell the steers to Tom Wheeler." "Who?" "Neighbor East Ridge. Will he pay fair?" Patrick gave a dry breath. No one pays fair when they smell worry. Then don't smell worried. This time he did smile. Briefly. Then it was gone. The next week changed the rhythm of the house. Bethany began keeping a second ledger in smaller handwriting. She counted flour before ordering more, measured lamp oil use, marked preserved goods in the cellar. Patrick started bringing her receipts instead of stuffing them in his coat pocket. At first he placed them on the table without comment. By the 4th day he said, "From the blacksmith." Bethany took it. "Thank you." On Friday, Patrick sold the 2 steers. The price was lower than he wanted, higher than Bethany expected. Trevor watched the animals leave through the gate. Why sell now? Patrick looked at Bethany. Only once, then back at his son, because feeding something that won't pay you back is another kind of losing. Trevor nodded slowly. He did not ask who had figured that out. That evening, Bethany found Patrick repairing a broken stall latch in the barn. She carried the ledger under one arm. "We saved $11 this week." Patrick kept working. "That's all?" Bethany stared at him. He glanced over. "I'm joking. You should warn people before you do that." "Why?" "So they can prepare." He tightened the final screw. Bethany opened the ledger. $11 matters. "I know. And if you repeat it, it matters more." "Exactly." Patrick set the screwdriver on the bench. "You're enjoying this." "I enjoy things behaving properly. Accounts, shelves, dough, people occasionally." Patrick folded his arms. "How am I doing?" Bethany looked him over, unclear. A pause. Then he laughed. Low, real. The sound filled the barn strangely. Bethany looked away first. By late November, the first lasting snow arrived. Not deep. 2 inches across the meadow, enough to whiten the fence rails and soften hoof prints around the barn. Bethany stood at the kitchen window before breakfast, holding a coffee mug between both hands. Patrick came in behind her. He had frost on his coat shoulders. North Road's getting hard. She turned. "Pass still open?" "For now." He poured coffee. Bethany nodded toward the ledger on the table. "If we're going to get through winter, I need you to stop buying things without telling me." Patrick took a drink. "I don't buy much. Yesterday you bought a new shovel. The old one broke. And where's the receipt?" He paused. Bethany raised an eyebrow. Patrick reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded slip, set it on the table. Bethany smiled. Improvement. He looked at her over the rim of his mug. "Don't get used to it." A few evenings later, they sat with the ledger after the children had gone upstairs. Bethany pointed to a planned hay purchase. "Cut this by 10%. Patrick shook his head. "Too risky." "Then sell another steer." "No." "Why?" "Because that one will finish well by spring. You can't keep everything." Patrick's chair scraped back. "I know my cattle, and I know your numbers." His face hardened. For the first time in weeks, the room went cold between them. Bethany closed the ledger. "Fine." Patrick stood. She looked up at him. "Did you want a winter servant or someone capable of helping?" He stopped. Bethany's voice stayed level. "If you want me to cook and keep quiet, say so. I'll do the work you hired me for." Patrick said nothing. "But don't hand me the books. Ask what you're missing, and then get angry when I find it." The stove hissed softly. Patrick looked at the closed ledger, then at Bethany. Something in his shoulders eased. He sat down again, slowly. He pushed the book back across the table. One word. "Help." Bethany opened it. Neither apologized. They did not need to. Outside, snow began falling again, soft against the windows. Inside, Patrick pulled his chair closer to hers so they could both see the page. Their shoulders nearly touched. Neither moved away. By the second week of December, winter had settled over Morgan Ridge for good. Snow lay in the shaded places all day now. The creek still moved beneath thin rims of ice, but the wagon road toward Bitter Pine had hardened into frozen ruts that made every trip slower. Patrick checked the sky more often. Trevor carried extra hay into the barn without being asked. Molly complained that the windows breathed cold air on her at night. Bethany stuffed strips of old wool into the worst gaps. Life narrowed. Morning chores, hot coffee, wood for the stove, cattle counted before dark, boots lined near the back door to dry. For a while nothing happened. Then the wind changed. It came down from the Sapphire Mountains shortly after noon on a Thursday, hard enough to bend the pine tops and send loose snow skimming across the yard in white ribbons. Patrick stood on the porch looking north. Bethany came beside him wearing the heavy coat he had bought for her. Storm? Yes. How bad? He watched the ridge disappear behind cloud. Bad enough. Trevor came from the direction of the south pasture. Papa. Patrick turned. 3 yearlings are missing. Where? North Bunch. Fence looked weak yesterday. Patrick's face tightened. I told you we'd fix it after the wind dropped. I know. Get the horses inside. We count again in the morning. Trevor looked toward the north meadow. If they're through the fence, they're cattle. Patrick's voice sharpened. They know how to stand in weather better than you do. Trevor's jaw set. Patrick pointed toward the stable. Inside. Trevor went. Bethany watched him cross the yard. There was something in the set of his shoulders she did not like. At 3, the snow thickened. At 4, the barn vanished and reappeared through gusts. By 4:30, Patrick came into the kitchen and asked, Where's Trevor? Bethany looked up from the stove. I thought he was with you. Patrick went still. Molly stopped cutting scraps of paper at the table. I saw him near the stable, she said. When? A while ago. Patrick crossed the room in 3 strides. The back door slammed open. Bethany followed. Trevor's bay gelding was gone. Patrick stared at the empty stall. On the peg beside it, Trevor's heavier winter gloves still hung untouched. For 1 second, Patrick did nothing. Then everything happened too quickly. He grabbed a saddle, a rope, his coat. Patrick. No answer. Patrick. He threw the saddle onto his horse. Bethany stepped into the stall opening. Move! No. His head snapped toward her. Bethany, where are you going? North. Where north? The fence. Which part? All of it if I have to. Snow blew through the open stable doors. Bethany stared at him. You can't see 50 yards. I know the land. Then use what you know before you ride into it blind. Patrick reached for the cinch. His hands were shaking. Not much. Enough. Bethany saw it. Move. No. His face changed. I said move. And I heard you. She stepped closer. If you're going after your son, go as the man who knows this land, not as a frightened father trying to die beside him. The words landed hard. Patrick's hand closed around the saddle horn until the leather creaked. For a moment, Bethany thought he might shout. He didn't. He shut his eyes once, opened them. All right. They went to the tack room. Patrick dragged a rough map from a shelf and spread it across the workbench. Bethany held the lantern. Where was the weak fence? Patrick pointed. Northwest line. Where would the missing cattle go? Depends on wind. Winds from the mountains. They'd drop southeast if they could. Trevor's boot prints were visible outside the stable for only a short distance before blowing snow erased them. Patrick called in 2 ranch hands from the bunkhouse, Henry Doyle and Frank Miller, both men who had worked the northern ground before dark all month. They argued over likely routes. Bethany listened, then said, Trevor wasn't chasing random cattle. Patrick looked at her. He knew where the fence was weak. Patrick turned back to the map. A thin line ran toward an old timber ravine. There's a line shack here. Used? Not since summer. Would he know it? Trevor's father and both ranch hands answered together. Yes. That settled it. Patrick packed blankets, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a small flask, and a coil of rope. Bethany handed him the heavier gloves Trevor had left behind. Patrick looked at them. His mouth tightened. Then he tucked them inside his coat. Before mounting, he turned to Bethany. If we're not back by midnight, you will be. He looked at her. Bethany corrected herself. If you're not, I'll keep the lamp burning and send word when the road allows. Molly stood in the doorway behind her. Patrick crouched before his daughter. I need you to stay with Bethany. Where's Trevor? Out where he shouldn't be. Are you bringing him home? Patrick hesitated. Bethany saw it. Molly saw it too. Patrick touched the girl's cheek. I'm going to find him. That was the truth he could promise. Nothing more. Then the three men rode into the storm. Their lanterns remained visible for less than a minute. After that, there was only white. Bethany shut the stable doors. Inside the house, the silence changed. Molly sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded. Bethany put water on to heat. Not because anyone needed it yet, because someone might. She laid blankets near the stove, set out clean towels, filled the coffee pot, checked the lamp, then checked it again. Molly watched. Are you scared? Bethany adjusted the stove damper. Yes. Molly seemed surprised. Grown-ups get scared? Constantly. Papa doesn't. Bethany looked toward the dark window. Your father does. He doesn't show it. No. Molly thought about that. Trevor does. Trevor tries not to. Outside, the wind struck the house hard enough to make the window panes tremble. Molly came closer. Bethany pulled a chair beside the stove. Sit. They waited. At 7, no one came. At 8, the snow reached halfway up the porch step. At 9, Molly fell asleep with her head against Bethany's arm. Bethany carried her upstairs, tucked Janet's unfinished quilt over her, then returned to the kitchen. The lamp stayed in the front window. At 10:30, Moss began barking. Bethany ran outside. A horse came through the storm. One rider. Not Patrick. Henry Doyle nearly fell from the saddle. Blood had dried along a shallow cut on his cheek where a branch had caught him. Bethany grabbed the bridle. Where are they? Henry bent forward, breathing hard. We found the north break. Trevor? Tracks. Bethany's fingers tightened on the leather. What tracks? His horse. Boys too. Then, Henry looked toward the black shape of the mountains. Patrick found where Trevor turned toward the timber. Why are you back? My mare went lame. Morgan sent me home before I killed her. Bethany swallowed. Frank? Still with him. How far? Couple miles north. Henry slid painfully from the saddle. Bethany caught his arm. He looked at her. They had his trail. Past tense. Bethany did not like it. Had? Henry's eyes moved toward the window where the lamp burned. Tracks vanished at the timber ravine. Bethany stood very still. Behind her, the house gave a low wooden groan as the wind pressed against the north wall. Did Patrick know where to look after that? Henry pulled off one glove with his teeth. He knows that ravine better than anybody. That wasn't my question. Henry looked at her. No. Bethany nodded once. Get inside. I'm fine. You're bleeding. It's a scratch. Then you can argue about it where it's warm. She took the reins and led his mare toward the stable. Henry followed. Molly appeared at the top of the stairs when they came into the house. Her hair was loose. "Is that Papa?" Bethany looked up. "No, sweetheart." Molly's eyes moved to Henry. "Did you find Trevor?" Henry opened his mouth. Bethany answered first. "Your father found his trail." "Then where are they?" "Still looking." Molly came down 3 steps. Bethany walked to the bottom of the staircase. "Back to bed." "I don't want to." "I know. I want to wait." Bethany glanced toward the front window. The lamp flame bent inside its glass chimney whenever the wind pushed through the frame. "Then wait here." Molly came down. Bethany wrapped a blanket around her and settled her near the stove. Henry drank coffee. His hands shook around the mug. "Not badly." "Enough." Bethany cleaned the cut on his cheek and pressed a strip of cloth against it. "You think the boy went down the ravine?" Henry stared into the coffee. "I think he was trying to reach the line shack. Can a horse get there?" "Not straight through." "Would Trevor know that?" "Yes." "Then he wouldn't take the straight way." Henry looked at her. Bethany continued. "He knows cattle. He knows storms. He knows his father would come after him." Henry nodded slowly. "Boy's stubborn. That isn't the same as stupid." "No." Bethany went back to the window. The yard had disappeared. The barn lantern was only a blur. She told herself to stop looking every 30 seconds. She looked again anyway. Midnight passed. Then 1. Molly slept sitting up, her head tilted against the chair back. Bethany moved her gently to the settee. Henry lay down near the kitchen door and was asleep within minutes. Bethany remained at the table. The coffee went cold. She reheated it, then forgot to drink it. At 2, the wind eased, not stopped, changed. The gusts came farther apart. Bethany noticed because the house stopped shuddering between them. She stood, went to the door, opened it a crack. Snow blew across the porch, but no longer sideways. She listened. Nothing. Closed the door. At 3, she changed the lamp wick. At 4, Molly woke and asked for water. At 4:15, Moss lifted his head from beneath the table. Bethany froze. The dog stood, ears forward. Then he barked. Once. Again. Bethany was already moving. She opened the door. At first there was only darkness and drifting snow. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow, uneven. A shape appeared beyond the yard. 1 horse. Then another. Frank Miller rode first. Patrick came behind him. Something was in his arms. Bethany ran off the porch without a coat. The cold hit hard enough to steal her breath. Patrick's horse stopped near the hitch rail. His face was gray with exhaustion, beard white with frost. Trevor lay across his chest and the saddle horn, wrapped in Patrick's coat. "He's alive," Patrick said before Bethany could ask. His voice broke on the second word. Bethany reached up. "Bring him inside." Patrick dismounted carefully. He lifted Trevor as if the boy weighed nothing. Trevor's face was pale. His eyes opened when Bethany touched his cheek. "Miss Whitaker?" "I'm here. My foot hurts." "Good." Trevor blinked. "Good? It means you can feel it." Patrick carried him into the house. Molly ran from the settee. "Trevor!" Bethany caught her gently around the shoulders. "Give him room, but—" "Room, Molly." Something in Bethany's voice made the girl stop. Patrick lowered Trevor onto the settee. Bethany began giving orders. "Frank, more wood." Frank nodded. "Henry, heat water, but don't boil it." Henry pushed himself upright. Patrick started pulling at Trevor's frozen boot. Bethany caught his wrist. Slow. Patrick looked at her. His eyes were wild in a way she had never seen. His foot. I know. We need to warm him. Gradually. Patrick's hand trembled under hers. Bethany tightened her grip. Patrick. He focused on her. Sit. I'm fine. No. Bethany, if you fall down, I'll have 2 patients instead of 1. For a second he looked almost offended. Then he sat. The bench creaked under his weight. Bethany removed Trevor's wet outer clothes. His ankle was swollen badly enough that she did not let him put weight on it. 2 fingers on his left hand were pale and numb. She wrapped him in dry blankets, brought the room warmer by degrees, and kept him near the stove without putting him against it. Trevor shivered hard. Molly stood at the far end of the room, clutching Janet's quilt. Bethany looked at her. Come here. Molly obeyed. Put that over him. She spread the quilt carefully across Trevor's legs. Trevor looked down at it. Mama's. Yes, Molly said. His eyes closed. Patrick sat 3 feet away. His hands hung between his knees. Bethany touched his sleeve. It was wet through. Your coat. I'm fine. You already said that. He looked at her. She pointed toward the stairs. Dry shirt, dry socks. Now. Patrick did not move. Bethany lowered her voice. I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm asking you not to get sick beside him. That reached him. He stood. When he came back, Trevor was drinking weak broth. The color had begun to return to his cheeks. Bethany looked at Patrick and nodded. Only once. Patrick sat again, this time closer. By sunrise, the storm had broken enough to show the barn. Frank left to send word toward Bitter Pine that Trevor had been found and to ask if the doctor could come when the road allowed. Nobody slept. Trevor drifted in and out. Molly refused to leave the room. Patrick said little. Near noon, Trevor woke fully. He looked around. Where's my horse? Patrick leaned forward. Stable. Did he make it? Better than you did. Trevor swallowed. I shouldn't have gone. Patrick's jaw tightened. No. I thought I could bring them back. You nearly didn't come back. Trevor stared at the ceiling. Patrick stood abruptly. Bethany saw the anger rising. Not at Trevor, at fear. She touched Patrick's arm. He stopped. Trevor looked toward his father. I wanted to help. Patrick said nothing. Trevor's mouth trembled. He turned his face away. If I can do everything myself, it doesn't matter when people leave. The room changed. Molly looked down at her hands. Patrick went still. Bethany sat beside Trevor. Who told you that? No one. Then where'd you get it? He shrugged. Pain crossed his face when his ankle moved. Mrs. Clark left. Mrs. Hewitt left. Miss Palmer left. His eyes moved toward Patrick. Mama left. Patrick flinched. Trevor saw it. No. I mean, she died. His voice cracked. Same thing when you're the one still here. Bethany looked at him for a long moment. You rode into a blizzard because you thought needing people was the dangerous part. Trevor stared at the blanket. She continued quietly. That isn't strength. His eyes lifted. Then what is it? Being alone before anyone gets the chance to leave you. Trevor's face tightened. For a moment he looked like he might argue. Instead, he asked the question Bethany had known would come eventually. Are you leaving in spring? Patrick looked at her. Molly looked at her. Bethany felt all three of them waiting. She could have lied. A kind lie. A warm lie. The sort adults tell children because truth feels too sharp. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. The silence lasted 1 second too long. Trevor understood. His face closed. He turned toward the wall. Bethany's chest tightened. Trevor, I'm tired. Patrick started to speak. Bethany shook her head. Not now. They let him rest. The doctor did not arrive until late afternoon. He examined Trevor's ankle, wrapped it, checked the fingers, and said the boy had been lucky. Very lucky. Nothing broken. No serious frost injury. Rest. Warmth. Time. By evening, Henry and Frank had gone back to the bunkhouse. Molly finally slept upstairs. Trevor slept on the settee because moving him hurt too much. Bethany sat at the kitchen table repairing one of his gloves where the seam had split. Patrick stood near the stove. He had been there for several minutes without speaking. Bethany tied off the thread. Go sleep. Patrick did not answer. She looked up. His face had changed since morning. Not panic now. Something older. He pulled out the chair across from her. Sat. For a while he watched the stove. Then he said, Trevor thinks leaving killed his mother. Bethany's hands stopped. Patrick looked at the dark window. Truth is, I think I did. Bethany set Trevor's glove down on the table. Patrick's hands were clasped so tightly between his knees that the knuckles had gone pale. What happened? For a long moment he said nothing. The stove settled with a soft pop. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked beneath Molly's room, and then went quiet again. Patrick finally spoke. 4 years ago, late October, we were short on winter money. Bethany waited. I had 27 head ready to sell. Buyer was coming through Bitter Pine and said he'd leave by noon. Janet told me the west wagon wheel was pulling. His eyes remained on the window. I told her not to take it anywhere until I got back. Bethany said nothing. She needed flour. Lamp oil too, I think. Maybe medicine for Molly. I don't remember all of it anymore. His jaw tightened. I remember the things that don't matter. Her gray dress. The chipped blue cup on the table. The way Trevor was sitting on the floor, making a fort out of kindling. He rubbed one hand across his beard. I rode out before sunrise. The words came slower now. Buyer delayed me. Then tried to cut the price, I stayed because I thought another hour might mean enough money to get us through winter without borrowing. Bethany looked down at the glove. Patrick continued. Janet hitched the wagon. His voice changed. Barely. On the creek road, one wheel dropped into a washed-out rut. The wagon tipped. She was thrown hard. Bethany's hand closed around the edge of the table. Was she alone? No. Trevor? He was with her. That explained the boy more than anything else had. Patrick stared at nothing. He ran back to the ranch. Henry found them first. Janet was awake when they brought her home. He paused. I thought that meant she was going to be all right. The room seemed smaller. She wasn't. Bethany knew better than to ask for details he did not offer. Patrick gave them anyway. She lasted 4 days. His fingers flexed once. The doctor came twice. Said there wasn't much to do but keep her comfortable. He looked down. I kept thinking if I'd come home earlier, if I'd fixed the wheel, if I'd told her harder not to go, if I'd taken less money and left the buyer standing there. Patrick. He looked at her. You weren't driving the wagon, no. You weren't the rut, no. You didn't make her leave the house. His eyes hardened. I knew the wheel was bad, and she knew it too. That doesn't help, no. Bethany leaned back. I didn't expect it to. Patrick's expression shifted. Most people, she suspected, had tried to clear him of guilt as quickly as possible. Bethany would not do that. Not with words he could refuse. She said, "You've been paying for it ever since." Patrick went still. Paying for what? Being alive when she isn't. His eyes narrowed. Bethany looked toward the doorway, then back at him. You work until you're too tired to think. You don't ask people to carry things you can carry yourself. You don't let Trevor see you afraid. You don't let Molly see you need anybody. Patrick's mouth tightened. That's not... It is. He stood. The chair scraped hard across the floor. Bethany did not flinch. Patrick walked to the stove, then the window, then back. You think you know me because you balanced some accounts and stayed through one bad night? No. Bethany's voice remained quiet. I think I know what punishment looks like. Patrick stopped. She folded Trevor's glove. My mother used silence differently. My sister used distance. Harvey used politeness. People find all kinds of ways to make pain look respectable. Patrick looked at her. Bethany continued. You've been calling yours devotion. That struck him. She saw it. His face did not break. Patrick Morgan was not a man whose face broke easily, but his shoulders lowered by half an inch. His hands opened. Outside, the wind brushed powder snow against the window. Bethany picked up the glove again. You loved Janet? Yes. You still do? Patrick did not answer. He did not need to. Bethany threaded the needle. That doesn't mean you have to keep bleeding for it. Patrick stared at her. Then he sat down again. Neither spoke for a long while. The next morning he left a note on the kitchen table. North pasture. Back before dark. Bethany read it twice. Patrick had never left a note before. He always assumed everyone would understand where he had gone. That evening he came back before dark. The next day he told her at breakfast, I'm taking Henry to look at the west fence. Bethany nodded. Thank you. Patrick looked mildly uncomfortable. For what? For telling me. He went out. 3 days later, he asked Bethany whether they should sell 6 head before January or hold until spring. She almost looked behind her to see if he meant someone else. What do you think? Patrick leaned one hand on the table. That's why I asked. Bethany opened the ledger. They talked for 20 minutes. Patrick disagreed with her twice. She disagreed with him 3 times. In the end, they sold 4. Not 6. Not none. It was the first decision that felt less like one of them winning and more like the ranch making sense. Trevor's ankle improved slowly. The doctor said he could put weight on it after Christmas if the swelling stayed down. Until then, he spent more time inside than he liked. One afternoon, Bethany found him at the kitchen table copying something into a small notebook. He shut it when she approached. Secret? No. Then why close it? Because I wasn't done. Bethany set a basket of mending on the chair. Trevor looked at her. Can you teach me something? Depends. The cold thing. What cold thing? What you did with my hands. Bethany sat down. Gradual warming, and how you knew what was bad. She studied him. You want to learn about frostbite? That. Fevers, too. Why? Trevor looked toward the window. So I know, that was enough. Bethany taught him in pieces, never all at once. What skin color to watch. Why numbness mattered. Why a fever could be watched at home sometimes and needed a doctor at other times. Trevor wrote everything down in careful block letters. Molly began sitting beside them, though she remembered almost none of it. What she did remember was that Trevor let her sharpen his pencil. January passed, then February. The snow deepened along the north fence and shrank beneath the south-facing wall. Patrick came inside more, not dramatically. A cup of coffee after supper. 10 minutes at the table while Bethany checked receipts. One evening, Molly fell asleep with her cheek on the table beside her drawing. Patrick lifted her carefully. Bethany reached for the paper before it slid to the floor. Their hands touched. Both stopped. Patrick's fingers were warm. Bethany's were dusted with flour. Neither pulled away immediately. Then Patrick lifted Molly. Bethany gathered the drawing. Good night. Night. He carried his daughter upstairs. Bethany stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the charcoal mark Patrick's thumb had left near the edge of her hand. In early March, the first clear drip of thaw began beneath the south eaves. Water struck the porch railing one slow drop at a time. The mountains were still white, but the road toward Bitter Pine had started showing dark earth in narrow strips. The mail rider came just before noon. He handed Patrick 2 envelopes. One was from the feed supplier. The other was addressed to Bethany. She recognized Irene Walsh's handwriting on the outer fold, but there was another letter inside. Heavy paper. Helena. Bethany opened it near the kitchen window. She read the first line, then the second. Her fingers tightened around the page. Patrick came in carrying a broken halter strap. He stopped when he saw her. What is it? Bethany folded the letter once. A job. Patrick set the strap on the table. Where? Helena. What kind? Hotel management. Kitchen and household staff. She looked down at the page. Better wages. Patrick said nothing. Bethany continued. My own room. Still nothing. Outside, snow slipped from the porch roof and landed with a soft, heavy thump. Bethany looked up at him. For the first time since coming to Morgan Ridge, spring did not sound like something far away. Patrick picked up the letter from Helena only after she held it toward him. He read it once, then again. The kitchen was quiet, except for the drip outside the eaves and the soft rattle of Trevor's pencil upstairs. Bethany watched Patrick's eyes move over the page. She had not decided what she wanted him to say. That was the problem. Part of her wanted practical questions. How much did it pay? When would she have to leave? Was the hotel respectable? Another part wanted something she would have mocked herself for wanting 6 months earlier. Don't go. Patrick folded the letter along its original crease. It's good work. Bethany waited. He handed it back. You should take it if you want it. That was all. She looked at him. Patrick reached for the broken halter strap. Helena's a solid town. More opportunity than Bitter Pine. I know. You'd do well there. I know. His fingers worked the cracked leather as if it required his entire attention. Bethany folded the letter again. You don't have anything else to say? Patrick looked up. What do you want me to say? The question hurt more than it should have. Bethany put the letter into her apron pocket. Nothing. She turned toward the stove. Patrick stood there a moment longer, then took the halter and left. The back door closed softly. Bethany stared at the iron stove door until the black surface blurred. She blinked once, hard, then reached for the flour bin. There was bread to make. That was something she knew how to do. By supper, Molly knew. Bethany had not told her. Trevor had. Molly sat beside her bowl without touching it. Helena's far. Some distance. How far? Bethany tore a biscuit in half. Several days depending on the roads. That's far. Yes. Molly pushed a carrot through gravy. Patrick ate in silence. Trevor did not. Why don't you just ask her to stay? Patrick's spoon stopped. Bethany looked at Trevor. That's between your father and me. No, it isn't. Trevor. Patrick's voice carried warning. Trevor leaned back. You brought her here because we needed her. Patrick put down the spoon. And now spring's coming and you act like that's all it was. Enough! Molly looked from one face to the other. Bethany stood. I'm finished. She carried her plate to the basin. Patrick's voice came behind her. Bethany. She kept her back to him. It's all right. It was not. That night she lay awake listening to meltwater strike the metal bucket beneath the roof leak Patrick had promised to fix when the snow cleared. Drop. Pause. Drop. The sound continued until morning. 3 days later, Bethany wrote Helena accepting the position. She did it at the kitchen table while Patrick was outside. The letter took less than 10 minutes. She read it twice. No corrections. When she sealed it, Molly was standing in the doorway. You said yes. Bethany looked at the envelope. Yes. Molly nodded, then walked away. No tears. That was worse. Trevor became louder over the next week. Not rude to Bethany, to Patrick. He slammed the barn door once hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Patrick made him open and close it properly 6 times. Trevor did. On the 6th, he said, You can't fix everything by making it shut right. Patrick stared at him. Trevor walked away before Patrick could answer. Bethany packed slowly. There was not much. 2 dresses, her Bible, a small tin of sewing needles, the coat Patrick had bought her. She folded that last, then unfolded it, then hung it back on the peg. She would need it for the journey. That made it practical. She told herself that was why her hand stayed on the wool longer than necessary. Patrick said very little about Helena. He did, however, repair the latch on her trunk. One evening, Bethany found him sitting on the floor near the front door with the trunk open, a screwdriver in one hand and 2 replacement screws beside his knee. What are you doing? Latch was loose, I didn't ask. No. She leaned against the wall. You've developed a habit of fixing things? Of fixing things I haven't asked you to fix. Patrick tested the latch. It was loose. Bethany almost laughed. Instead, she said, Thank you. He nodded. Neither moved. For a moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Then Molly called from upstairs. The moment ended. At the end of March, the snow retreated enough to expose most of the south pasture. The road to Bitter Pine reopened to wagon traffic, though shaded stretches remained muddy and deep. Bethany began closing the ranch accounts. She intended to leave them clean. Not because Patrick had asked. Because unfinished numbers bothered her. She sat at the table after supper with the ledger, Leonard Shaw's note, and 3 stacks of receipts arranged by date. Patrick was in the barn. Trevor was reading near the stove. Molly had gone upstairs. Bethany checked the interest total again, then frowned. She turned back 2 pages. The same charge appeared in December. Livestock loss surcharge. She traced it with 1 finger, then found it again in February. Same wording, same amount. She pulled Shaw's note closer. There was no such quarterly charge in the main interest clause. Bethany checked the reverse side. Nothing. Trevor. He looked up. Do you know where your father keeps older receipts from Shaw? Desk drawer. Which one? Bottom left. Under the cattle papers. Bethany crossed the room. The drawer stuck. She lifted slightly and pulled. Inside were folded contracts, branding records, a tax receipt, and a packet tied with twine. Bethany untied it. Shaw. She spread the papers across the table. Trevor came closer. What is it? I don't know yet. That was true. She found another fee. Handling adjustment. No corresponding cattle delivery. Then another. Winter extension. The note mentioned an extension privilege, but nothing about the amount written on Shaw's receipt. Bethany took out a clean sheet of paper. She started adding. Once, then again. Trevor watched her face. Is it bad? Bethany wrote the total, no. He frowned. That sounds like bad. She looked up. It's worse for Mr. Shaw. Patrick came in 20 minutes later. Mud dried along the bottoms of his trousers. Bethany did not greet him. She held out the February receipt. Read that. Patrick took it. Livestock loss surcharge. Now read December. She handed him the other. His brow tightened. Same thing. Exactly. Patrick looked at her. Bethany opened the signed note. Show me where Leonard Shaw is allowed to charge it twice. Patrick read, then read again. I don't see it. You don't see it because it isn't there. His face hardened. Bethany pushed another receipt across the table. And this fee? Patrick picked it up. What the hell is a handling adjustment? I was hoping you knew. I don't. Neither does your contract. Patrick pulled out a chair. Bethany placed her calculations before him. If these charges aren't supported somewhere else, your spring balance is wrong. By how much? Enough. How much? She tapped the total. Patrick stared. His jaw tightened. That changes the North Meadow. Possibly. Possibly. We need the original records checked before you go throwing Leonard Shaw through a wall. Patrick looked at her. Bethany held his eyes. I mean it. He sat back. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, very slowly, he slid the receipts into a straight stack. What do we do? Bethany looked at the documents spread between them. For months, she had been preparing to leave Morgan Ridge because spring meant the arrangement was over. Now, with her trunk half-packed upstairs and Helena waiting, the ranch had placed one last problem in her hands. She gathered Shaw's receipts. We find out whether Leonard Shaw has been charging you for debt you never owed. Patrick's first instinct was written plainly across his face. Ride into bitter pine. Find Shaw. Demand answers. Bethany saw it before he stood. No. Patrick looked at her. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. He glanced toward the door. Bethany placed one hand flat on the stack of papers. If you go to Shaw angry, he'll call this a misunderstanding and make you look like a rancher who can't read his own note. Patrick's jaw tightened. That's not what this is. I know. So does he. Then don't give him the advantage. Trevor had moved closer to the table. Patrick looked at him. Upstairs. I'm 13, upstairs. Trevor looked ready to argue. Bethany said quietly, Go. He went. Not happily. Patrick remained standing. What do you suggest? Bethany pulled the signed note toward herself. We take the original note. Every receipt we have, the cattle sale records, and your payment dates to Bitter Pine. To Shaw? To the county office. Patrick's eyes narrowed. You want the clerk involved. I want someone else reading the same words we are. A pause. And witnesses. Patrick lowered himself into the chair. Bethany began sorting. They worked until nearly midnight. She made 4 stacks. Principal payments, interest, livestock transactions, charges that did not appear to belong anywhere. Patrick read dates aloud while Bethany copied totals onto a clean sheet. Twice he corrected her on cattle figures. Once she corrected him on a payment made the previous February. Neither took offense. When they finally stopped, the lamp had burned low. Patrick looked at the page. How much? Bethany pointed. If the clerk agrees with this, Shaw's balance is overstated by enough that you keep the North Meadow and still make the spring payment. Patrick stared at the number, then at her. You sure? I'm sure enough to put it in front of him. That was all she promised. They left for Bitter Pine the next morning. The road was ugly with thaw, frozen beneath in some places, mud on top in others. The wagon wheels sank deep along the creek road, and Patrick had to climb down twice to clear packed mud from the brake linkage with a short iron bar. Bethany kept the documents inside a leather satchel beneath her coat. She checked them at every stop. Patrick noticed. You think I'm going to lose them? I think roads have a habit of making fools of confident people. He wiped mud from his gloves. You talking about me or the papers? Both. That earned the faintest breath of laughter. By noon, they reached Bitter Pine. The town looked smaller than Bethany remembered. That surprised her. The hotel porch, the church hall, the freight office. All of it had once seemed large enough to contain the whole of her humiliation. Now it was just a town. Irene Walsh spotted them from the hotel window and came outside before the wagon fully stopped. You're leaving already? Bethany shook her head. Not today. Irene looked at Patrick, then at the satchel. That sounds like trouble. Patrick said, Shaw. Irene's mouth flattened. That sounds like expensive trouble. The county office occupied 2 rooms behind the land record desk near the east end of town. A clerk named Amos Reed sat behind a broad oak counter with spectacles low on his nose and ink stains across 2 fingers. Patrick placed the note down first. Bethany placed the receipts beside it. Amos looked from one to the other. What am I checking? Bethany answered. Whether these charges exist in that signed agreement. Amos pulled the papers closer. Before he could begin, the outer door opened. Leonard Shaw walked in. Harvey Benson followed him. Clyde Abbott came behind Harvey carrying a folded freight invoice. Bethany looked at Patrick. Patrick looked at Shaw. Shaw stopped. His face did not change much. That made Bethany trust him less. Morning, Morgan. Shaw. Leonard's gaze moved to the papers. Then Bethany. Miss Whitaker. Bethany nodded. Harvey saw her and immediately looked uncomfortable. Clyde, for once, said nothing. Shaw removed his gloves. Something wrong? Patrick answered. We're finding out. Shaw looked toward Amos. The clerk lifted the signed note. Mr. Shaw, I've been asked to review several charges connected to this agreement. Shaw gave a small smile. If Morgan had a question, he could have asked me. Bethany said, He has one now. Shaw's eyes shifted to her. I wasn't speaking to you. Patrick's posture changed. Bethany felt it beside her like a door swinging shut. She did not look at him. That's unfortunate, she said. I'm the one who found the problem. Shaw studied her, then glanced at Patrick. Your housewoman keeps your accounts now? Patrick's answer came before Bethany could speak. She's the reason I know what's in my own ledger. The room went still. Harvey looked at Bethany. Clyde rubbed his thumb along the edge of his invoice. Amos pushed his spectacles higher. Let's stay with the paper. Bethany opened her copied totals. The first charge was simple. Livestock loss surcharge. December, then February. Same amount. Amos scanned the note. Where's the authorization? Shaw leaned over the counter. Standard adjustment when collateral values fall, not asking whether you consider it standard. Amos tapped the note. I'm asking where Morgan agreed to it. Shaw's mouth tightened. Bethany slid forward another receipt. Then this. Handling adjustment. Amos read it, looked at Shaw. What was handled? Shaw said, cattle transaction. Patrick spoke. There wasn't one that month. Shaw turned toward him. Records were consolidated. Bethany opened the cattle sales sheet. No cattle left Morgan Ridge between the dates written here. Shaw's eyes sharpened. For the first time, the calm began to crack. He reached for the receipt. Bethany did not stop him. He read it. Then another. Amos sat back. This needs recalculation. Shaw said, You're taking her figures over mine? Amos looked annoyed. I'm taking arithmetic over conversation. Clyde made a sound that might have been a cough. Harvey looked down. For the next half hour, nobody raised a voice. That made it more final. Amos checked every payment, every dated receipt, every clause in the original note. Bethany answered only when asked. Patrick stood beside her, arms folded, saying little. At last, Amos wrote a revised figure on a clean page. He turned it around. This is the balance I can support from the signed paper and the receipts before me. Patrick looked down. Bethany already knew what it meant. The North Meadow stayed with Morgan Ridge. Patrick read the number twice. That's final, unless Mr. Shaw produces another signed agreement. Everyone looked at Leonard. He had none. His face had gone hard. Fine. Amos dipped his pen. I'll note the corrected balance in the county record. Shaw put on his gloves. Before leaving, he looked at Bethany. You've caused Morgan a great deal of inconvenience over a few accounting differences. Bethany held his gaze. No. She folded her copy of the figures. I noticed them. Shaw left. Clyde followed quickly. Harvey remained. For one awkward moment, he seemed to want to speak. Bethany gathered the documents into the satchel. Harvey said, Bethany. She looked at him. I suppose congratulations are in order. For reading? His face reddened. No. For the ranch. It's Patrick's ranch. Harvey looked toward Patrick, then back at her. You've done well for yourself. Months earlier, those words would have cut. Now they simply sounded small. Bethany closed the satchel. Good day, Harvey. She walked out. Patrick followed. Outside, the sky had cleared. Snowmelt ran in narrow brown streams along the edges of the street. Patrick stopped beside the wagon. Bethany looked at him. Well? He said nothing for several seconds. Then he reached for the satchel. Bethany handed it over. Patrick held it against his side. You saved the meadow. We saved the meadow. No. His eyes held hers. You found what I didn't. Bethany looked toward the mountains. You gave me the ledger. Patrick said quietly, That doesn't make us even. She looked back at him. Something in his expression made her chest tighten. But he only said, Let's go home. The word followed Bethany all the way back to Morgan Ridge. Home. That evening, Molly demanded every detail. Trevor wanted to know whether Shaw had lied outright or simply charged what he thought Patrick would never notice. Patrick said, "Doesn't matter. We don't pay what isn't owed." Trevor looked at Bethany. "You beat him with numbers." Bethany nearly choked on her coffee. Patrick looked down at his plate. His shoulders moved once. Molly grinned. "I think Papa laughed." "I breathed," Patrick said. Bethany looked at him. This time he did smile. It lasted only a second. Later, after the children had gone upstairs, Patrick called Bethany back to the table. Several bills lay beside the ledger. Coins, too. Bethany frowned. "What's this?" "Your wages. I know what money looks like. All of them through Monday." Bethany stared at him. "Monday?" Patrick pushed the stack toward her. "And this?" More money. She did not touch it. "What is that?" "Your share for the accounting work." "I didn't ask for a share." "I know." "Patrick." "You earned it." The room seemed suddenly colder. Bethany looked toward the stairs, then back at him. "What happens Monday?" Patrick's eyes dropped briefly to the table. "Irene has a freight wagon going toward Helena." Bethany stopped breathing for half a second. "I arranged you a place." There it was. The thing she had told herself she wanted. Freedom. A clean departure. No obligation. No debt. No excuse to stay. Patrick pushed the money closer. "You'll have enough for the trip and something left when you arrive." Bethany stared at him. "After all this, you can just let me go?" Patrick's face tightened. The words came slowly. "I won't make your lack of choices the reason you remain with me." Bethany looked at the money between them, then at the man across the table. Patrick's hands were open, not reaching for her, not holding her. That hurt more than if he had. Bethany looked down at the money on the table. For months, Patrick had noticed things she never said aloud. A loose latch, cold hands, the chair she trusted more than the others, the coat she would not have bought for herself. Now he had noticed the one thing she had spent her whole life wanting, a choice. And somehow it felt like being dismissed. She gathered the bills and coins slowly. "Thank you." Patrick's jaw tightened. Bethany stood. He did too. For one foolish second, she thought he might stop her. He didn't. She carried the money upstairs. Monday came cold and bright. The spring thaw had opened the road, but left deep mud beneath the morning crust. Snow still clung beneath the pines, while the south pasture showed long strips of brown grass and flattened weeds. Bethany dressed before sunrise. Her trunk stood at the foot of the bed. The repaired latch closed cleanly. She put on the dark wool coat Patrick had bought for her and ran her palm once over the altered seam. Downstairs, Molly was already sitting at the table. She had not touched breakfast. Trevor stood by the stove. Patrick poured coffee into the chipped brown mug. Nobody seemed to know what words belonged to the morning. Bethany set one hand on Molly's shoulder. "You need to eat. I'm not hungry. You'll be hungry later." Molly looked at the table. Bethany waited. Finally, the girl picked up half a biscuit. Trevor stared into the stove. "Helena isn't forever." Bethany looked at him. "No." "You could come back." "I could." He nodded as though filing that away. Patrick said nothing. A wagon rolled into the yard just after 7. Irene Walsh was riding beside an older freight driver named Silas Boone, bundled in a gray traveling cloak. Patrick carried Bethany's trunk outside. She followed. The morning air smelled of thawing earth, horses, and wet pine. Irene climbed down. Road's ugly past the creek, but we'll make town before noon. Bethany nodded. Molly came onto the porch. Her face was pale. Bethany crouched. The girl threw both arms around her neck. Bethany held her tightly. No speech. No promise. When Molly finally stepped back, she wiped her nose with her sleeve. Bethany pretended not to notice. Trevor came next. He stood with both hands shoved into his coat pockets. Right. Bethany smiled faintly. That's not a request. No, I'll write. Trevor nodded. Then, awkwardly, he hugged her. Only for a second. When he stepped away, he looked embarrassed. Bethany did not make it worse by saying anything. Patrick stood beside the wagon. Her trunk was already secured beneath a canvas cover. Bethany walked toward him. He held out his hand. Not to help her up, just his hand. She placed hers in it. His fingers closed around hers. Warm. Careful. Safe road, he said. Bethany swallowed. Take care of them. Patrick's eyes changed. I will. And yourself. He looked away first. I'll try. Bethany climbed onto the wagon. Silas gathered the reins. The horses moved. Morgan Ridge began to fall behind. Molly stood on the porch waving until the house became small. Trevor did not wave. He simply stood there. Patrick stood beside him, huge and still, one hand resting on the gatepost. Bethany faced forward. She did not look back again. At the ranch, silence moved in quickly. Patrick carried Molly's untouched plate to the basin. Trevor followed him into the kitchen. Patrick reached for the coffee pot. Don't. Patrick stopped. Trevor stood near the table. His face was tight. Don't what? Act like this is right because you made it proper. Patrick's eyes narrowed. Watch yourself. You told her to go. I told her she could go. Same result. Patrick set the coffee pot down. She has work waiting. I know, her own wages. I know. A room, I know. Patrick's voice sharpened. Then what are you arguing about? Trevor looked at him. You. Patrick went still. Trevor swallowed. You always say people ought to choose for themselves. Yes. But you never told her what she was choosing between. Patrick stared at his son. Trevor continued. You gave her Helena. His voice dropped. You never gave her you. Patrick looked toward the empty chair near the table. The reinforced one. Bethany's chair. Trevor followed his eyes. You're scared she'll say no. Patrick's face hardened. Enough. No. The word came out louder than Trevor probably intended. Molly stood in the hallway. Trevor looked at her, then back at Patrick. You keep letting people leave because you're afraid asking them to stay makes you selfish. Patrick said nothing. Trevor's eyes were bright now. Maybe it does. A pause. But maybe letting them leave without telling them the truth is selfish too. Patrick looked at the doorway, then at the clock. 7:40. The wagon had been gone less than an hour. He moved. Fast. Coat, hat, gloves. Trevor's eyes widened. Patrick reached the door. Papa? Molly's voice. He stopped, turned. She stood holding one of Bethany's forgotten dish towels. Patrick looked at the cloth, then at his daughter. I'll be back. Molly's mouth trembled. With her? Patrick hesitated. No promises. Molly nodded. He left. The gelding was still saddled from morning chores. Patrick mounted and rode south. The road was worse than Irene had warned. Mud pulled at the horse's legs. Snowmelt ran across two low stretches. At Pinewater Creek, Patrick slowed long enough to cross safely, then pushed again once the ground firmed. He saw the freight wagon near a long rise 3 miles outside Bitter Pine. Bethany heard the horse before Irene did. She turned. Patrick was coming up the road. Her heart kicked hard. Silas drew the team aside. Patrick stopped beside the wagon. His horse was breathing heavily. Bethany looked at him. "What's wrong?" Patrick climbed down. "Nothing." She stared. "Then why are you here?" He looked toward Irene. Irene immediately took great interest in the opposite side of the road. Patrick removed his hat. Bethany had seen him do that before difficult things. He held it in both hands. "I needed help when I brought you home." Bethany's face went still. Patrick continued. "I needed someone to cook. Keep the house, watch Molly, help with Trevor." The words hurt, but she let him finish. "I needed someone who could do what I couldn't." Bethany looked away. Patrick took one step closer. "I don't need a housekeeper now." She looked back at him. "The ranch can make spring." He nodded. "Yes. The debt is corrected." "Yes." "Trevor's stronger." "Yes." "Molly doesn't need watching every minute." "No." Bethany swallowed. "Then what are you doing here?" Patrick's grip tightened around his hat. For once, there was nowhere for him to hide. No ledger, no broken gate, no storm, no child to save. "I need you at that table." Bethany did not move. Patrick's voice lowered. "I need you arguing over my books, telling me when I'm being stubborn, laughing at me when I deserve it." His eyes held hers. "I need that chair not to be empty." Bethany's throat tightened. Patrick continued. "I wake up and listen for you in the kitchen." A pause. "I come in from the barn and look for your coat on the hook." He looked down once, then back at her. "The house feels wrong when you're gone." Bethany said nothing. Patrick breathed out slowly. "I don't want you because we need you." The words landed differently than anything else he had said. "I want you because you're you." The road was silent. Even the wagon horses had settled. Bethany looked at him for a long time. "What are you asking?" Patrick's eyes flicked toward Bitter Pine. "If you want Helena, go." Her brows drew together. "I mean it." "I know. I won't hold wages over you, or the children, or the ranch." Patrick stepped closer. "If you come back, I want it because you chose it." Bethany's voice was quiet. "Chose what?" Patrick swallowed. "Us." She stared at him. "Us?" His expression changed. The giant cowboy who had faced blizzards, debt, cattle buyers, and a missing child looked suddenly uncertain. "Me too." Bethany's eyes burned. She blinked. Patrick looked almost alarmed by that. "I don't expect an answer because I rode 3 miles through mud." "Good. I don't expect marriage because I gave you work." "Better. And I don't expect you to keep proving you're worth having around." Bethany looked at him. Patrick continued. "If we marry, your money stays yours. We put your share of ranch income in writing. Properly. County record, if that's what it takes." Bethany's mouth moved. "You make proposals sound like cattle contracts." Patrick looked miserable. "I'm better at cattle contracts." A laugh escaped her. Small, then another. Patrick's shoulders eased. Bethany climbed down from the wagon. Irene looked away to hide a smile. Patrick stood before her. Bethany folded her arms. "You still haven't actually asked." Patrick nodded slowly. "Bethany Whitaker." "Yes?" His voice roughened. "Come home with us." The first time he had said it, she had been nearly stranded. No money, no road east, no place to sleep once Irene's work ended. This time Helena waited. A room, wages, a life entirely her own. Bethany looked toward Bitter Pine, then toward the road behind Patrick. Morgan Ridge was somewhere beyond the hills. Molly's drawings, Trevor's notebook, the brown coffee mug, the reinforced chair, Janet's blue shawl, her own coat hanging beside Patrick's. Bethany stepped forward. "I want to come home." Patrick closed his eyes once. Just once. Then he reached for her hand. He did not pull her toward him. Bethany closed the remaining distance herself. By May, the last snow had disappeared from the shaded fence lines. Reverend Edwin Foster came to Morgan Ridge on a clear Saturday afternoon. Irene stood beside Bethany. Trevor wore a clean shirt and looked uncomfortable about it. Molly had woven early meadow flowers into a crooked little chain. The wedding took place on the porch. No crowd from Bitter Pine. No spectacle. No one waiting to see whether the large woman from Pennsylvania would be rejected again. Patrick wore his best dark coat. Bethany wore a simple blue dress Irene had helped alter. When Reverend Foster asked Patrick whether he took Bethany freely, Patrick said, "I do," before the Reverend had quite finished. Trevor coughed into his hand. Molly giggled. Bethany looked at Patrick. "So much for patience, I'm sure." That evening they sat down to supper. Molly set 4 places. Trevor came in complaining that a spring calf had somehow found a way through a gate no calf had any right to fit through. Patrick ducked beneath the kitchen lintel. Bethany carried the bread to the table. Then she stopped beside the reinforced chair. Months ago she would have tested it. A hand against the back, a shift of weight, a private calculation. She did none of that now. She sat. Patrick took the chair beside her. Molly reached for bread. Trevor argued about the calf. Outside, Pinewater Creek moved full with spring runoff beneath the evening light. The chair held. So did the house. Bethany no longer wondered whether either had been made to hold someone like her. She had stopped asking the question. She was home. She had stopped asking the question. She was home. And maybe that is what makes Bethany's story stay with you. Imagine being in her place for just a moment. Imagine crossing half a country because someone promised to value your heart, only to discover that his promise disappeared the moment he saw you. Then imagine finding another man who never asked you to become smaller, quieter, prettier, or easier to love. Patrick gave Bethany shelter when she had nowhere to go, but in the end, shelter wasn't the greatest thing he gave her. He gave her the freedom to leave. And Bethany, finally knowing she could build a life somewhere else, discovered that Morgan Ridge was where she wanted to build one. Maybe real love is sometimes that simple. Not holding someone because they need you. Not making them earn their place every morning. Just opening your hand and trusting that, if the love is true, they may place their hand back in yours. Patrick learned that loving again was not betraying Janet. Bethany learned that one man's rejection did not measure her worth. And 2 children learned that someone staying means more when she was always free to go. If you had been sitting in Bethany's place on that wagon, would you have returned to Morgan Ridge? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected love have a place in your heart, subscribe and stay with us. There are many more journeys across these old Western roads still waiting to be told.